Clara is a struggling artist whose vibrant, whimsical paintings are a source of private joy and public ridicule, especially from her pragmatic family. Her quiet, wealthy uncle Julian is the only one who never mocks her, but his silence is unreadable. Desperate for a break, Clara convinces a local gallery owner to include one of her favorite silly paintings in a charity auction for emerging artists. Her family is dismissive, certain she'd be humiliated. The auction night starts, as predicted. Bidding on Clara's piece is sluggish and stalls at an embarrassingly low number. As Clara is preparing to flee in shame, a frantic bidding war erupts between two anonymous phone bidders, driving the price to an astonishing, logic-defying $500,000. Life as Clara knows it is shattered. The media frenzy that follows eventually uncovers the buyer's identity, a holding company owned by her uncle, Julian. Feeling that this is the ultimate act of pity or a cruel joke, Clara confronts him. The climax is not an argument, but a heartbreaking revelation. Julian sits Clara down and tells her the story of his late wife, Eleanor. She too was a painter with a whimsical, colorful style, and she had been Clara's biggest champion when she was a little girl. Julian confesses that the family's relentless criticism and pressure for her to get a real job crushed Eleanor's spirit, causing her to abandon her art, a decision that haunted her until the day she died. He then shows Clara an old, unfinished painting of Eleanor's, a piece so uncannily similar to the one he bought that it takes Clara's breath away. He explains that his bid wasn't pity. It was a promise he'd made to his dying wife, to never let another artist in their family be silenced. He was ensuring Clara had the freedom his wife never did. This profound act of love and remembrance gives Clara more than financial security. It gives her a legacy and an unshakable validation of her life's purpose. The family is forced to confront the consequences of their casual cruelty, and their relationship with Clara is irrevocably changed. The novel ends with Clara in her studio, ready to paint not for approval or for money, but from a place of freedom, honor, and a deep connection to the aunt whose dream she can now carry forward. My world is measured in color, cadmium, yellow, for the burst of joy when a new idea strikes, ultramarine blue for the deep, quiet hours of the night when the city is asleep and I can finally paint, burnt sienna for the constant, earthy anxiety about next month's rent. My family, however, measures the world in billable hours and peer-reviewed journals. My father is a cardiologist, my mother a corporate lawyer, my older brother Mark is a surgeon. To them, my life as a painter is not a career, it's a silly phase that has unfortunately stretched into its 8th year. Still playing with your paints, sweetie? My mother would ask during our weekly obligatory phone calls. The question wasn't mean-spirited, it was worse. It was pitying. My art wasn't dark or brooding or political. It wasn't the kind of thing that critics wrote long, impenetrable essays about. I painted whimsical worlds. I painted girls with constellations in their hair, foxes who wore tiny crowns, and oceans that rose up to meet the moon. They were, I suppose, silly. But they were my silly. They were the most honest things about me. The painting I was working on now was my favorite. It was a large canvas, 4 feet by 4 feet, depicting a young woman with fiery red hair, sitting on the edge of a pier and looking down into the water. But instead of fish, a gint, gentle-eyed whale was looking back up at her, its skin a tapestry of swirling nebulae and distant galaxies. I called it the Cetacean Astronomer. To me, it was about connection, about finding the universe in the most unexpected of places. To my brother, who had seen a photo of it, it was that weird fish picture. My uncle Julian was the only one who never commented. He was my mother's brother, the family's black sheep turned golden goose. He'd dropped out of college to start a trucking company, a venture my grandfather had called decidedly blue. 30 years later, his logistics empire spanned the continent, and he was worth more than all of his pedigreed siblings combined. He was a quiet man, especially since my Aunt Eleanor had passed away from cancer a decade ago. At family dinners, Haywold used seat in the Liston, his eyes taking everything in, his presence a silent, weighty anchor in the turbulent sea of my family's ambitions. He never praised my art, but he never mocked it either. He just looked. I remember one Thanksgiving he came to my tiny studio apartment. He'd stood in front of a half-finished painting of a bear reading a book by lamplight, and just looked at it for a full 5 minutes, his expression unreadable. Then, he'd just nodded, clapped me on the shoulder, and left. His silence was a mystery I could never solve, but it was better than the noise my parents made. It was a space I could breathe in, and I needed all the space I could get, because I was about to do something that would either be my first small step towards a real career, or the source of my family's mockery for the next 10 years. I was about to try and sell the Cetacean Astronomer. There was a gallery downtown, the Marlowe Space, that championed emerging artists. It wasn't a top-tier blue-chip gallery, but it was respected. The owner, a terrifyingly chic woman named Evelyn, had a reputation for having a good eye. I'd spent a month working up the courage to email her. I sent her my portfolio with a short, polite note. I didn't expect a reply. To my astonishment, she wrote back a week later, "Ms. Vance, your use of color is compelling, though your subject matter is commercially challenging. I don't have a spot for you in my main season, but I am curating our annual Art Elevate charity auction next month. If you would be willing to donate a piece, it would be good exposure. Let me know." It was a backhanded compliment, wrapped in a business proposition, but it was the most encouragement I had received from a professional in my entire life. Donating a piece meant I wouldn't see a dime, as the proceeds went to a city arts fund, but the exposure, the chance to have my work seen by actual collectors, it was everything. "I'd be honored," I typed back, my hands shaking. "I have the perfect piece." I told my family the news during our next Sunday dinner. My father was in the middle of a story about a new triple bypass technique, and so the perfusionist said. He paused as I cleared my throat. "I have some news," I announced, my voice a little too loud. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me. My father, my mother, my brother Mark, he's Wafay, and Uncle Julian. My painting, The Cetacean Astronomer, has been selected to be in the Art Elevate auction at the Marlowe Space. My mother smiled her gentle dismissive smile. "Oh, Clara, that's nice. A charity auction. How lovely of you to donate your time." She had completely missed the point. My brother, Mark, did not. "You mean someone is actually going to try and sell that weird fish picture?" "Hey Eskid," a smirk playing on his lips. "What's the starting bid?" $50. "It's a juried selection," I said through gritted teeth. "It's an honor to be included." Of course, my father said, already turning back to his steak. "Just don't be disappointed if it doesn't. You know, the art world is very fickle." The message was clear. "Don't get your hopes up. You are not a real artist. This is a silly little game." Across the table, Uncle Julian said nothing. He just watched me. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes, which always seemed a little sad to me, held a flicker of something I couldn't decipher. Then he went back to his meal. I felt a familiar hot flush of shame and anger. Why did I even try? Why did I seek their approval when they were constitutionally incapable of giving it? But as I drove home that night, the anger cooled into a hard, stubborn resolve. They thought it was a joke. They thought I would be humiliated. I would prove them wrong. I didn't know how. Boot a wold meke him say. Night of the auction was a blur of clicking heels and clinking champagne glasses. The Marlowe Space was transformed. White walls, bright lights, and a crowd of people who looked like they'd been born wearing black turtlenecks. I felt like a fraud, an imposter in my one good dress, which I'd bought at a consignment shop. My painting was hanging on the far wall, lot number 32. From a distance, it looked good. The colors were vibrant, élevé, it held its own. I clung to that small comfort like a life raft. No one from my family was there. Of course, my mother had wished me luck, her tone suggesting I was heading off to a children's school play rather than a major event in my professional life. Uncle Julian was out of town on business. I was completely, utterly on my own. I stood in the back of the crowded room, trying to look like I belonged there. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a silver goatee, moved through the lots with ruthless efficiency. A stark, minimalist sculpture sold for $10,000. A moody, black-and-white photograph for $15. The numbers were staggering. These were worlds away from my rented studio and my part-time job shelving books. Finally, hey Saidit, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Lot 32, a fantastical piece from a very promising young artist, Clara Vance. It's titled The Cetacean Astronomer. A picture of my painting flashed up on the large screens flanking the stage. A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. "We'll start the bidding on this wonderful piece at $1,000, the auctioneer said. "Do I hear 1,000? Silence, a deep, profound, humiliating silence. Not a single hand was raised. Not a single paddle. The room was quiet except for the faint clinking of ice and glasses. The auctioneer smiled a tight, professional smile. $1,000, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful entry point for a new collector. All proceeds to a very worthy cause. Still nothing. This was it. This was the moment my family had predicted. The public humiliation. I felt my face burning. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I started to back away towards the exit, my vision blurring with tears. Let's try 500. 10, the auctioneer said, his voice losing some of its earlier enthusiasm. $500 for this magnificent piece. A steal? Do I have 500? A paddle went up in the back. A woman with a severe haircut. Thank you, madam, the auctioneer said, a note of relief in his voice. Have $500. Do I hear 6? Silence again. The woman had clearly made a pity bid. This was almost worse. Couldn't watch anymore. I turned and pushed my way through the crowd towards the door. My face a mask of shame. I was a joke. My art was a joke. My family was right. And then I heard it. One moment, the auctioneer said, his hand pressed to his earpiece. I have a phone bidder at $1,000. I stopped. And another phone bidder. He sighed, his eyes widening slightly. At 2,000. A murmur went through the crowd. Phone bidder 1 is at 5,000, the auctioneer said, his voice picking up speed. Phone bidder 2 is at 10,000. The room was buzzing now. People were turning in their seats, whispering, trying to see who was on the phone. I stood, frozen, halfway to the door. 20,000, 50,000, $100,000, the auctioneer shouted, his professional calm completely gone, replaced by a giddy disbelief. My legs gave out. I sank into an empty chair by the wall, my hand over my mouth. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. It was a dream, a hallucination. 200,000 from phone bidder to 250 from phone bidder 1. Heads were shaking in the audience. Evelyn, the gallery owner, was standing by the stage, her hand pressed to her chest, her face pale with shock. The bids kept climbing. 300,000, 400, the numbers had lost all meaning. They were just sounds. 490,000 from bidder to, the auctioneer said, his voice hoarse. He looked at his assistant, who was on the phone with bidder 1. The assistant spoke into the phone, then nodded. / The auctioneer took a deep, shaky breath. He looked out at the stunned crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, phone bidder 1 is at $500,000. He looked to the other assistant. She spoke into her phone. Lista Ned, then shook her head. Bidder 2 was out. Sold, the auctioneer yelled, slamming the gavel down with a crack that echoed through the silent room, for $500,000. The room exploded into a roar of applause and disbelieving chatter, but I couldn't hear it. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. $500,000. For my silly fish picture. Someone, somewhere, had just paid $500,000 for a piece of my soul, and I had no idea who or why. The rest of the night passed in a surreal, dreamlike state. Evelyn, the gallery owner, rushed to my side, her earlier coolness replaced with a gushing, sycophantic warmth. Clara, my dear, I knew it. I knew you had something special. She steered me through a crowd of people who were suddenly desperate to shake my hand, to tell me how much they'd always admired my work. An art critic who had once dismissed my style as painfully naive was now asking for an exclusive interview. It was intoxicating and nauseating all at once. Who was it? I kept asking Evelyn. Who bought it? I'm sorry, my dear, the buyer wishes to remain anonymous, she said, patting my arm. They bid through a holding company, very discreet, but clearly, very serious collectors. A holding company. The mystery only deepened. I left the party as soon as I could, escaping into the cool night air. I walked the 30 blocks back to my apartment, the city lights feeling alien and strange. I felt completely disconnected from my own life. When I finally got back to my studio, I just stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by my other paintings, my silly, whimsical, unsold paintings. Was the cetacean astronomer different? Was it a fluke? Or was I the one who had been wrong all along? The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was my mother, Clara Ann Vance. Hayes sighed, her voice a strange mix of hysteria and awe. Mark just sent me an article from the Chronicle's art blog. Is it true? Did your painting really sell for that much money? Yes, Mom, aside, my voice flat. But how? Who? I don't understand. Is this some kind of joke? I don't know, aside. And that was the honest truth. The calls came one after another. My father, his booming voice reduced to a confused stammer. My brother, Mark, who sounded almost respectful. The family that had never taken me seriously was suddenly desperate to understand the one thing they truly valued. Money. And I had no answers for them. The story became a minor sensation in the local arts scene. Mysterious, collector drops $500,000 on unknown artist. Speculation was rampant. Was it a tech billionaire? A foreign investor? My name was in print next to a number with 5 zeros. I felt like I was reading about someone else. The truth came out 3 days later. It wasn't an art critic who broke the story. It was a society columnist, with a knack for sniffing out financial secrets. I was sitting in my studio, staring at a blank canvas, when Chloe, a friend from my bookshelving job, sent me a link. The headline read, Art World's Mystery Man Revealed, Local Tycoon Julian Vance, uncle of artist, behind record-breaking bid. I clicked on the link. The article detailed how the holding company that had purchased the painting, a shell corporation called EV Holdings, was a subsidiary of my uncle's logistics empire. EV, Eleanor Vance, my late aunt. I read the words, but they didn't make sense. My uncle Julian, the quiet man who never said a word about my art. My confusion quickly curdled into a hot, sickening feeling. Humiliation. It wasn't a tech billionaire. It wasn't a serious collector. It was my uncle. This wasn't a validation. It was pity. The ultimate act of pity. He had seen his pathetic, struggling artist niece about to be shamed at a public auction, and had swooped in with his millions to save her. He hadn't bought my painting, he had bought my dignity, or so I thought. The $500,000 sale had been a mystery that made me feel like a star. This revelation was a slap in the face that made me feel like a charity case. I grabbed my keys. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to see him. I had to stand in front of him and ask him why he would do this, why he would turn my one moment of triumph into a secret act of family condescension. My uncle Julian lived in a house that defied expectations, in a neighborhood of ostentatious new-built mansions. His was a modest, older stone house, surrounded by a sprawling, slightly wild English garden. It was Aunt Eleanor's garden. He had kept it exactly as she'd left it. I hadn't been to the house since her funeral 10 years ago. I parked in the driveway and walked to the front door, my heart pounding a furious, angry rhythm. I rang the bell. He answered it himself. He was wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans, and he didn't look surprised to see me. Clara, he said, his voice calm. I was wondering when you'd come. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. I didn't even wait for him to invite me in. He just looked at me with those sad, steady eyes. Let's go to the study. He sighed. He led me through the quiet house to a room at the back. It was filled with books and comfortable, worn leather chairs. It smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Though he didn't smoke, it smelled of him. I stood in the middle of the room, my arms crossed. Was it a joke? It demanded. Was it the biggest, most expensive act of pity in history? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? To have my one big break be a secret handout from my rich uncle. He didn't flinch. He just gestured to a chair. Please, Clara, sit down. I remained standing. He sighed, a long, weary sound. It wasn't pity, Clara, and it wasn't a joke. It was a promise. A promise, I scoffed. A promise to who? To make your niece look like a fool. No, he said softly. To Eleanor. The name hung in the air between us. My Aunt Eleanor. The ghost in this quiet house. The woman I remembered as having a laugh, like wind chimes, and a constant smudge of dirt on her cheek from her garden. I don't understand. A whispered, my anger beginning to falter, replaced by a deep, aching confusion. You were her favorite, Julian said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. She saw it in you, even when you were just a little girl. On the kitchen floor, the spark, the thing she had, the thing she lost. He walked over to a large, oak cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked it with a small, ornate key. I want to show you something. He sighed. He reached inside and pulled out something wrapped in a swath of yellowed linen. He carried it over to a large easel that stood empty by the window, a silent sentinel in the dusty sunlight. He carefully unwrapped it. It was a painting, unfinished. The canvas was old, the colors still vibrant. It depicted a field of sunflowers, but the sunflowers weren't ordinary. They were tilted up, as if they were faces, watching a flock of iridescent birds flying across a turquoise sky. It was whimsical. It was magical. It was silly. It was in my style. Or, rather, my style was in it. I saw my own brushstrokes, my own use of impossible color, my own heart, reflected back at me from a canvas painted before I was even born. Eleanor painted this, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. She was the artist in the family, long before you. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the painting, my hand covering my mouth. She was brilliant, he continued, his voice a low murmur. She had a whole world inside her. ... But your grandparents, my family, they didn't understand it. They were like, your parents are with you. It's a nice hobby, Eleanor, but you need a real career. How will you ever support yourself? It's childish. They wore her down, Clara, chipped away at her belief in herself, day after day, year after year, with their casual, constant dismissal. Until one day, she just stopped. She packed up her paints, stored her canvases in this cabinet, and started taking accounting classes at the local college. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a decade of unshed tears. It broke her heart, and she spent the rest of her life regretting it. She would go into the garden, and I knew she wasn't just tending to her roses. She was trying to find the colors she had lost. He took a shaky breath. When she was sick near the end, we talked about it. She made me promise. She said, Julian, if you ever see that spark in someone else in this family, don't let them put it out. Don't let them do to anyone else what they did to me. He walked over to me, his hands gentle on my shoulders. I saw it in you, Clara. I've seen it for years. And when you told us about the auction, I heard their voices, your mother, your father, mock. The same words, the same dismissive tone, the same poison ... And I said, no, not again, not this time, he finally explained. The second phone bidder was real, an independent collector who had been interested in my work. He had driven the price up to $40,000. Julian bidding, as EV Holdings, had come in over the top, not just to beat the other bidder, but to make a statement, to build a wall of validation around me so high that my family's criticism could never touch me again. It wasn't about the money, kiddo, he whispered, his voice cracking. The money is meaningless. It was about freedom. I wanted to buy you the freedom that Eleanor never had. The freedom to walk into your studio every day and paint whatever silly, wonderful, brilliant thing is in your heart and never, ever have to worry about what the world thinks. The tears were streaming down my face now. The anger, the humiliation, it was all gone, washed away by this wave of profound, heartbreaking love. This wasn't pity, it was protection. It wasn't a handout, it was a legacy. He hadn't bought my painting for $500,000. He had bought it for a lifetime of regret and a promise to a dying woman. And that was a price I could finally, tearfully, understand. I don't remember leaving my uncle's house. I remember standing in front of my aunt's unfinished sunflower painting, my tears dripping onto the dusty floorboards, and feeling a connection to a woman I barely knew. A kinship that transcended time and death. Uncle Julian and I didn't say much more. We didn't need to. Everything had been said in the quiet, sunlit study, in the language of shared secrets and long-held grief. He made me a cup of tea, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate china, and we drank it in silence, per two outsiders who had finally found each other. The next family dinner was a week later. The atmosphere was different. The usual boisterous energy was gone, replaced by a strained, awkward quiet. My painting, or rather, the sale of it, was the elephant in the room. My brother Mark was the first to break. So, Clara, he said, trying for a casual tone, and failing miserably, 500 grand, that's pretty incredible. I guess there's more to that art stuff than I thought. Before I could reply, Uncle Julian spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. I bought the painting, he said simply. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father stared at him, his mouth slightly agaped. // you, my mother whispered. But why? Julian looked around the table, his gaze landing on each of his siblings, on my parents. His eyes were cold, because it's a brilliant piece of art. His sighed, his voice level, and because Clara is a brilliant artist, and I will not stand by and watch this family crush another one of its own. Not again. He looked pointedly at my mother. He says, we all know what happened to Eleanor. The name landed like a stone. The color drained from my mother's face. My father looked down at his plate. No one spoke. The truth, a truth that had been buried for decades, was finally out in the open. Ugly and undeniable. They had been so proud of their accomplishments, their degrees, their respectable careers, and now they were being confronted with the cost of that pride. A sister's broken dream. The rest of the dinner was a funereal affair. No one knew what to say for the first time. They were speechless. Their world of logic and prestige had no framework for this kind of emotional reckoning. Things changed after that night. The change wasn't sudden or miraculous. It was a slow, awkward recalibration. My parents started asking about my work, their questions clumsy but sincere. My brothers stopped making jokes about my weird fish pictures. They didn't suddenly understand my art, but they understood that it had a value beyond money. It had the weight of memory and regret. It had my uncle's formidable protection. The money from the auction sat in a bank account, mostly untouched. I used some of it to buy my studio apartment, so I would never have to worry about rent again. I used it to buy the highest quality paints and canvases, but its real value wasn't monetary. It was the silence it bought me. The silence from my family's criticism. And more importantly, the silence from the voice of self-doubt in my own head. My uncle had the cetacean astronomer hung in the study, right next to Eleanor's unfinished sunflowers. He sent me a picture of them together. They looked like they were in conversation. Two silly, wonderful, brilliant paintings by two women from the same family, finally at peace. Today, I stand in my studio. The sun is streaming through the large window. A fresh canvas sits on my easel, white and full of promise. It is no longer a battleground of hope and fear. It is just a space to create. I am not just Clara, artist. I am Clara, the keeper of Eleanor's flame. I pick up a brush, I dip it in cadmium yellow, and I begin to paint. Not for them, not for the critics, not even for the memory of my aunt, but for myself, / for the pure, unadulterated silly, wonderful joy of it. And it is more than enough.